Thank you, Lurie.
Whew, child, y'all been going through it. Y'all been going
Yeah.
through it. And as a parent of a now college freshman and a middle schooler, I'm very curious as to first of all, how are you all faring? And what should we as parents and education consumers be expecting will be different this year as compared to previous years?
Yeah, I wish I could say we were faring well, but 2 weeks ago, about 700 of our members were laid off finally
Wow.
after months of litigation. Again, without any explanation about why they're being laid off, other than the president told us to, uh, without any plan to
Mhm.
continue their work. Most of their work was statutorily mandated. So, we've had better days.
Wow. Now that I can't even we've spent a lot of time talking about what it is going to look like to navigate this new era in which we find ourselves because we haven't been here before. And we have read about similar eras in the past, but people our age, Sharia, we have never lived in something like this. So as it pertains to the fact that you all are no longer there, an additional 700 now let go. I don't know what that even brings the total to, but we're seeing estimates that roughly half of the population of staffers and folks who made up the Department of Education are now gone. What impact is that going to have on the provision of services that the Department of Education has been relied upon to provide up until this point?
There will be no provision of services. I feel like this administration is making me like I feel a little bit like Miss Cleo, like I'm predicting the future because I've been saying this since January
Call
21st.
me now.
Exactly. You're not going to get services, you're not going to get loans, and they are proving me correct. We have 27,000 backlogs of calls from the ombudsman office. So these are people who are calling our largest division, federal student aid, asking, "Hey, where's my student loan to get, forgiveness? What's going on with my student loans?" And they're not going to get those calls back. And that's no reflection of the people that remain. You can't make the same amount of bricks when they're not providing you with straw. And so, yeah, we've seen this before. If you want this to be a Christian nation, they're not even taking the lessons from the Bible. We've seen this in Egypt. You're just not going to. We've seen this with Nebuchadnezzar when you go after government workers and you try to try to fire them literally. You're not going to get the same results. And yeah, there is no way.
Mm. So when it comes to let's talk about let's break this down if we could, because a lot of times you don't know the value of a thing that you had until you no longer have it. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who are thinking, "Child, I ain't never had no conversation with nobody at the Department of Education. I don't even know why we having this discussion right now." What would in a normal year, we're in August. What typically would be happening at the Department of Education? What would you be preparing for? How would the in a normal year, how would the Department of Education be positioning itself right now to be fully effective for the next school year?
Yeah. So I think we'll go back a few months, to make sure that school districts had what they need to prepare for the start of school. We would have already given out funding and grants so they can make the hires that they needed to make, or plan for the programs that they needed for their students. Uh, we had an $8 billion freeze on those grants when this administration came in, was just recently lifted, but it was lifted a month before school was supposed to start. How are you going to find and hire and interview the right people before that you need for the children?
Mm.
People would have already had answers to questions about their student loans before they are to enter college. That's not happening. In the Office for Civil Rights, we would have tried, finished up resolutions for students, particularly students with who have accommodations, who complain that their accommodations were not given to them. We
Mm.
would have prepared or resolved those complaints, worked to resolve those complaints before the start of the school year, so they didn't, enter into a new school year with the same issues. Our work has just been put at a standstill.
So if I'm a parent of a child with special needs, what's going through my mind right now?
Good
What?
luck.
Ooh,
Oh,
girl.
prayers. I hope you're a person of faith. I mean, I think that's basically what when someone,
Wow.
when people elected uh this administration, you know, knowing Project 2025, I'm guessing they committed to just doing for their own kids and not having any
Mm.
state support. And maybe they did not realize how much the state and the government supported the educational attainment of their children. But unfortunately, they're going to have to find out. So, I think, how are you going to expect? Uh, the services that you relied on for your children if the school has no money because the grants were frozen to
Wow.
provide those services? How are you going, and if they don't provide those services, what recourse will you have? Because the people, the lawyers that were in place in the Office for Civil Rights to resolve those types of complaints have been fired.
So even if you have a justifiable claim, a claim that in any previous year would have been an easy no-brainer, like absolutely you have a claim, here's what the relief
Mhm.
will be, let's get this in place. None of the machinery that you would need in order to go from here's your valid complaint to resolution, none of that machinery, it sounds like nobody's working the machines. Like there's
Yeah,
nobody.
basically, yeah. It's like, I don't know if your listeners are fans of Real Housewives, but it's like, which Trey said, "Who's gonna check me, boo?" There's no one to check bad actors. So, your child might have an IEP that entitles them to extra time on a test. If the school district refuses to give it to them, there's no one to check them.
My
And
God.
that's by design.
I didn't know that that's where that phrase came from. I had
Who's
no.
gonna check me, boo? I used to be
I was
a
2 years old
avid,
when I learned that.
avid.
Well, at least the Department of Education is still educating somebody. You just educated me on that particular point. Sharia, I saw recently that in states like Texas, they have passed legislation to make it easier to arrest homeless students, or I'm sorry, not to arrest, to suspend homeless students or students who come from quote unstable families. Are you familiar with this sort of legislation?
No, I'm not, but I'm not surprised. I mean, this is this is part and parcel of an illegitimate regime.
Because
Um,
don't we have a legislation in place called the McKinney-Vento Act that is supposed to protect students from housing insecure communities and families, that is supposed to prevent this sort of thing, and ensure that just because you're homeless or housing insecure, you can't just be abused by the school system. Are laws like that still even in effect?
I mean, they might still be on the books, but again, who's going to enforce them if you
Damn
fired the
it.
government workers?
Oh my
Mm.
God.
And
So,
again, this is just part and parcel of any illegitimate regime. You were right. We in this country have not experienced something like this. It's one of the reasons why, people considered this country great. It's the reason why people left countries that were, in turmoil to come to this nation. And now I guess we were just like, we want the drama too. We want to see, what post-Weimar Germany is like. I don't know.
Jesus. So let's say I live in a state like New York, where we still tend to have some sort of normalcy, at least in as to the extent that our elected officials can protect us from what's happening at the federal level. But now the way that they're coming for Attorney General Tish James, the way that they're coming for elected officials, Adam Schiff and others, I don't know how well that protection will be able to be implemented. But if I'm in a state that's still not run by crazies, then are there state apparatus and instrumentalities that I can tap into that might be a source of relief for me? Because again, if that's the case, then we're in a situation where literally it's not just location, location, location. Location might mean you have rights or you don't have rights. Maybe you got birth control or you don't, depending on your address. Maybe you have diversity, equity, and inclusion or you don't, depending on your address. Is that similar to how I would need to approach this if I'm looking to the state level to protect my child going into education spaces this year?
You know, I, I don't have the words. Well, I will say I cannot advise on that because I'm not sure what states can and cannot do. I will
Mm.
say that there is no more oversight, federal oversight for states if they choose not to do anything. So, I would not, even if you're in a donor state, I would not sit on my laurels and say, "Whoo, I'm good. I'm in New York," or "Whoo, I'm good. I'm in California,"
Mm.
because if you have bad actors who decide that they don't want to do anything for you or your fellow constituents or your children, um, there's no federal oversight
Wow.
to make sure that that's accomplished. And this is where we didn't learn, I guess, our history. We have,
Mm.
in this country, we have been through this before in the 1860s when we had states decide, whether or not certain people, my ancestors were humans or not. And then, they realized, okay, we can't continue on. Someone's going to be dissatisfied uh, when you just allow the states to control themselves and you don't have the federal oversight. We end up in a civil war. I don't.
My God.
Yeah. So I would not be, I would never rest on my laurels. I would say that everyone should be on alert. And part of being on alert is making sure your elected officials know exactly where you stand on this issue and what you expect from them from all down the line. So, your congressperson, your senators, certainly for federal oversight, but also your state reps, your state senators, your state legislators, because you cannot be comfortable or complacent. I think we are in the situation that we're in because people were comfortable and complacent and didn't think the things that happen in developing nations would ever happen to the United States.
Mm,
And this is, now we're feeling those effects.
my God. You know, as I think about all the things that have been taken, I've been trying to keep track, like trying to keep score of all the things that they've gotten away with destroying, erasing, because my vision of this world is that one day we will get certain things. We're going to be able to recreate this world because they're breaking this world as we know it. And my hope is that we will, at some point in the rebuilding process, we will think about what we had before we had civil rights. We will think about what civil rights brought us, and then we will think about what life was like once they took it again. And I'm curious, Sheria, as somebody who has literally been on all sides of the Department of Education in terms of being a student, a participant, an educator, an attorney, talk to us about what a fully functional, highly effective Department of Education would look like in the future, because we're going to have to rebuild, whether it's rebuild as a nation or rebuild. I've been talking about some, parallel systems that we may have to have if we're not able to get access to our rights within this broader society. How do we create parallel systems for ourselves? And then one of my very bright YouTube commenters was like, well, Lurie, every time we created a parallel system, they destroyed it. So what are you really saying? We're going to leave that part alone, because I don't think the conversation about what I'm really saying is, I don't think we're ready to have that conversation yet. We ain't ready yet, because a lot of us are in denial. And I'm not going to move too far ahead of the audience, because you don't want to be disconnected from your group. But I'm curious as to what, in your perspective, a highly effective, equitable Department of Education would look like in the future, at the point where we are able to remake it into something actually great and not this facsimile approach to returning to 1750s America as some semblance of greatness.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that all federal agencies should have move, once we rebuild, if we're able to rebuild, is a marketing team. That's a failure, I think, because our people have just done their work and put their heads down, and we have not explained to people why they need us. And that has allowed uh, actors to say, or bad actors to say, "Oh, they're not needed," because we have not. Um, we were just doing our work. And I think a good bureaucrat is invisible. You don't notice them because nothing's going wrong.
Mm,
And and many of my colleagues don't even know what the our other colleagues do in their other divisions. So I think uh, you know marketing and communication about why we're needed, not just at the U.S. Department of Education, but at every federal agency, or not even why we're needed, but what we're doing,
mm,
how we're helping people, and telling that story has to happen, so that no one will forget why we have what we have, why these agencies were created, why, what services they actually provide and what services that, they don't provide. So you don't have bad actors lying about the things that we do and the efficacy of it. Because without that marketing, it allows for, you know, uh, bad actors to have successful propaganda, which is what we are experiencing now. And I think too, public understanding of what we do allows for better accountability because
Mm,
if you know, okay, well, the U.S. Department of Education is responsible for the enforcement of civil rights. Well, one, I know now that I have some recourse if I have an issue with my school district,
right.
and I can then judge the efficacy of that agency based on my own experience because I know that I have this is a service that I could be using. Or, I know that if I have student loans and the loan servicer has just, increased my interest, I know that I have recourse with the Federal Student Aid Ombudsman Group. I understand now that there is something there are ways that the government can protect me. And I think most Americans aren't even aware of what protections we do provide, which has allowed this administration uh, pretty much carte blanche to lie.